We are at the end of 2023, and I want to share with you the books that made the biggest impression on me this year. But having said that, they're not for everyone. They're a bit eclectic, but for what it's worth, if you're interested in what I enjoy learning about, these are the books that meant the most to me. The first is called Strange Rites, and this is one of the most interesting books I've read in years. As I've gotten older, I have less of those earthquake, earth-shattering moments when it comes to reading books, but this was one of those books that I absolutely loved and was a bit of an earthquake moment for me. It's one of the few books that I bought for all my friends and sent them copies immediately. Strange Rites is not a topic that I would ordinarily get into. It is about religion. So in the United States and across the world, institutional religion is decreasing. A lot of people are self-selecting that they are not part of a religion. What this book would argue is that many of us are still at the maturity level of choosing to be a part of a religion, but those are not institutional religions. So the book looks at what are the new modern religions that we're participating in as a society. Honestly, more than almost any book in the recent past, this book helped me understand the world and how we're operating as society way better. It answered a lot of questions I had about why we're behaving the way we're behaving as a species, as a society. So if you're interested in a very cool book that's a little bit different, that reflects back why we're acting the way we are and the religions that we are taking up that are not the old institutional religions, I highly recommend picking up this book. Okay, the next one is called The Horse, the Wheel, and the Language, and this is probably my most eccentric pick. I have been obsessed with a people called the Yamnaya for a few years now. The Yamnaya were the originators of the languages called the Proto-Indo-European languages. So any European languages, all the way to Indian languages, these people spread all around the world and spread their culture with it. It is my personal belief that many of the cultural systems we've inherited as people come from these folks 5,000 years ago, for better and for worse. The Yamnaya were incredibly patriarchal, hierarchical, loved war, and they spread a lot of these values into our society. And so if you're listening to this video, it is in English, and so we are speaking a descendant language of the Yamnaya. I believe the Yamnaya had such an outsized impact on who we are today that they are worth studying. But everything I read up until now was only getting a piece of the truth. It wasn't really getting the whole truth. This book, The Horse, the Wheel, and the Language, is the most comprehensive book I have read on the topic and shed a ton of light on who these people are. Having said that, while it was deeply impactful for me, I wouldn't recommend it as a starting point on this topic. If you are interested, there's a couple other books that I would recommend instead. The first is Ishmael, which starts to break down some of those cultural artifacts that we continue to live out today. Now, I first read Ishmael when I was in university, and at the time, it didn't resonate with me. I didn't like it. I'm not exactly sure why, but I reread it a few years ago, and I loved it. It was a really important step in understanding how our society is functioning today. If you're interested in another book that's a little bit more detailed, but it's a little bit, I think, biased and misses some of the picture, it's called The Chalice and the Blade. And at the time, this book really blew my mind. I still think it's an amazing book, but it's a bit incomplete, and that's where The Horse, the Wheel, and the Language fills in the rest of the picture. Okay, number 3, The Storm Before the Storm. So to give a little context, for whatever reason, I have never cared about the Roman Empire or the Roman Republic. I love history, but it's just not something that interests me. For the first time in my life, I read a book about the Romans. The Storm Before the Storm is an amazing tale about the fall of the Roman Republic. So this is before the Roman Empire, before Caesar. It's the hundreds of years of history that led to the collapse of the Republic. And of course, we know that history never repeats, it rhymes, but I do find it interesting as our society gravitates away from democratic norms, away from republic norms, to look at a book like this. And it's so interesting to see how a republic, in this case the Roman Republic, came to be extinct. Some of the craziest stories I have ever read in my life come from this book. It's like taking the Kennedy brothers and amping it up by 10, 20, 30 times in terms of interest and weirdness of how that society ended up collapsing. So I'm not an expert, as you can tell, in Roman history. It's just not something I'm that interested in. But if, like me, you want a place where you can start, or you just want to read some really interesting stories, or you want to see how a republic, a democracy can fail, then I highly recommend The Storm Before the Storm. Okay, number 4 is Robert E. Lee and Me. This is a book I picked up, and it's about the former head of history at West Point. So this is a historian who worked at West Point. So it's a military dude who looks at the history of how the Civil War was won by the North, but the narrative was ultimately won by the South. What's interesting about this book is the author is arguing for more history. If we only take a little piece of information, it's not complete, and so we can tell narratives that fit our personal political agendas. And what he's advocating for is more history, more facts, getting a complete picture. And it's genuinely interesting to find how a white man might grapple with how he was raised in the South, in a military culture, and some of the myths that he's believed that propagate the lost cause of the South. So while I didn't find the information in the book necessarily new, because I've studied some of the history of the lost cause and some of the racist narratives that emerged after the Civil War, it is interesting to watch someone who is white, who's in the military, grapple with these nuances and grapple with a more full history and the implications that these people that we might lionize were actually traitors and committed treason against their country. Now, having said that, and I think it's a very interesting perspective and one that's needed, I always think it's important to go to the source and to hear from people who might not have as much privilege or power or position of authority tell us about their own experiences. So while I didn't put them on the list, I have another 2 books that I'm currently reading. I didn't put them on the list because I just haven't finished them yet. But these books are really good, and every few pages I have to pause and stop and step away and think about it for like a few weeks. So it's taken me a while to get through them, but they were a big part of my 2023 experience. So the first one is the 1619 Project. I am finding this an absolutely amazing book. I'm really enjoying it, but it is really challenging and thought-provoking in the best of ways. So if you want to go to the source, you want to hear from people of color, then this is one of those amazing resources that have been given to us for us to study. The other one is How the Word is Passed. Again, it's a really amazing kind of narrative exploration of different parts of our American fabric, American society, and how racism is woven into some of the tales that we tell and don't tell in this country. Amazing book. I have to put it down constantly to think about it, introspect. So I haven't finished yet, but I do highly recommend it. And number 5 is The Score Will Take Care of Itself. I read this book many years ago, and it made a huge impression on me then. It is the memoirs of Bill Walsh, who is a legendary NFL coach, and I think that is one of the best leadership manuals that I have ever read. The San Francisco 49ers went from being one of the worst team in all of sports to winning 5 Super Bowls within 14 years and becoming a dynasty. In this book, Bill Walsh lays out his entire philosophy and how he's able to achieve this amazing feat of elite performance over many years. I reread this book because I was using it to write my own book. So this year, myself and my co-founders, we released our own book called Crisis and Leadership. In it, we talk about Bill Walsh and some of his philosophies. So this was also a fun part of 2023, was also writing a book. So if you're interested in a very cool sports story and very good lessons on leadership, I highly recommend Bill Walsh's book. It is one of the best, and I'm so happy I read it all those years ago. Number 6. We're talking about the Phoenicians. This year I was going to Lebanon, and so I enjoy learning the history of a place. I started all the way back in ancient times and read all the way to modern times, so I could get a really good understanding of the culture and the people and the nuances of where I was going to go to serve my clients and do work. The Phoenicians was an amazing book. It is the most incredible story that for some reason is untold. The Phoenicians were one of the richest civilizations, and they invented incredible maritime power. At the height of their empire, they are considered to have better ships than Columbus used to reach the Americas. They routinely sailed from Britain all the way to India, and this is thousands and thousands of years ago. So they beat the Europeans, the Spaniards, the Italians, the British by thousands of years, and they did it by building an incredible society. If you're interested in how a society can be really pro-commerce, make a ton of money, but be super egalitarian and for the good of all people, please read about the Phoenicians. I have never been more inspired by a culture and a people who made tons of money and did it while caring for everyone. The Phoenicians never had a military, they never went to war, they had great egalitarianism, women had great positions of power in society. They prove that it's possible for both things to happen simultaneously. Number 7, $100 million offers. Now, I've always been in business. I worked in finance, in management consulting, mergers and acquisitions. So I know business. I studied business and economics in university, but $100 million offers rewired my brain to be very entrepreneurial. I read that book and I did not sleep for 2 or 3 days. And when I was going to sleep after that initial period of excitement, every night I would fall asleep and I could be aware of my brain rewiring itself and making new connections. This book, more than any other one, has rewired me to be very entrepreneurial as I lead my consulting business, 3 Peak Coaching and Solutions. So if you're interested in a book about sales, about marketing, about just building great businesses, and you want to apply it yourself, I highly recommend $100 million offers. It has been a game-changing book for me. Number 8, Unreasonable Hospitality. I picked up this book based on a recommendation. I actually had no clue what it was about, but it was one of those amazing books I couldn't put down. It is a story about how the owners and the chef took the restaurant from a 2-star restaurant to being the #1 restaurant in the world. Core of the book, the premise of the book, is that you give unreasonable hospitality. You give the most, give the most, give the most. It's a philosophy that I've started to adopt more and more as I run my 2 businesses, 3 Peak and Adapting Leader. So if you want to have a great business and you want to make an impact on people, then I highly recommend giving more. Unreasonable Hospitality is one of the best books that gets to the core of great leadership and great customer service. So these are the 8 best books that I personally read in 2023. Of course, that means they were the best for me and my life and my situation that I'm in. They might not all apply to you. You might not be interested in all of them. I'm not affiliated with any of these books. I don't make any money off these books. These truly are just books that helped me out as I went through my life this year. I wish you an amazing 2023. I hope it was a great year and that you learned a lot and made the most of it. And here's to 2024. May we learn a ton, grow a ton, and evolve.